This is the 7th day of the June 92 7-day retreat in Springwater. As usual, I will not go into questions today, having given them a rest yesterday. I will read from some authors, trying to find a few things that may address themselves to what has moved people in this retreat deeply. Questions of the relationship of quietness, aloneness, and one's daily life. Relationship at work and relationship at home. In the book Being and Becoming, Vimalataka, toward the end, addresses herself to those questions. And I will also read from Letters to a Young Poet by Rainer Maria Rilke, because there's a beautiful way of going into how to find out if one is to, how can I do something creative? People have been asking. How do I know what I love to do? I love to write. Is that compatible with inner work? Then there will be some poetic prose by Krishnamurti. And I picked a book from long ago, haven't read it in many years, some poems by Ryokan from the book One Robe, One Bowl, and poems which we've recently read at the end of retreat by Mary Oliver from a book called House of Light. All of this material is copyrighted, and therefore, even though we are taping the talk for people to listen to it here, the tape will not be for sale. Being and Becoming is one of the late transcriptions of Vimala's talks in India. It came out in 1989. Book gives some of the dialogues which took place at Dalhousie in India during the summer of '89. It was said yesterday that the content of meditation is aloneness. And lest this provoked confusion, let us look into the implications of aloneness. There is no dichotomy between aloneness and relatedness. Relationships need not mean dependencies. We're going to look at this phenomenon of relationship, the connotation of relatedness, and the burden that dependency carries along with it. Really learning is something fantastic, and perception of life as it is quite an ecstasy. It is quite possible that one might imagine a contradiction or at least a dichotomy between aloneness and relatedness. The modern man or woman devoted to argumentation, imagining argumentation as the essence of inquiry, might say, well, on one hand you say life is relationship and living is relating, and in the same breath you talk about meditative way of living, saying that meditation is aloneness. Are you not contradicting yourself? Now, if you would take the verbal voyage and are willing to peel the words and perceive the meaning they contain, if this willingness is there, let us proceed. The cosmos, which is organic, dynamic wholeness, is alone. When you say it is a wholeness, you imply it is not a totality built up by the manipulation of philosophical theories, It is not a totality built up or manipulated by the scientists, putting their electrons or protons or neutrons or superstrings or whatever together. Putting them together as the children put the blocks together and play mechano. It is not a manipulated totality of pieces being integrated together and creating a totality. It is a self-created, self-sustained organic wholeness. So I say it is aloneness. Please do see this. It is aloneness or oneness that manifests through the emergence of innumerable shapes, sizes, colors, energies, and through the solidification of those energies or what you call material objects. The emergence of all these is taking place, has been taking place for millions of years, and the emerged forms playing around in the wholeness merge back someday, some moment. The dance of emergence and merging back goes on in the aloneness, in the wholeness. The wholeness of cosmic life is related to the manyness of material objects, as the waters of the ocean are related to the ripples, the waves, the storms taking place on the breast of oceans. There is a relatedness without dependency. There is a mutuality, reciprocity. The emergence of manyness, the emergence of forms and objects enriches the wholeness. It does not detract anything from the organic wholeness. Not only that they are not parts of the wholeness as you have parts of motor cars, but they are the wholeness themselves. Every human being is a tiny wholeness, demonstrating the cosmic holiness, representing the cosmic wholeness. A blade of grass, a leaf of a tree, a drop of water, they contain the quality of that wholeness and creativity. If this is clear, let us come back to ourselves. From the cosmic life around us, let us come back to the cosmic life within us. We are not outside the wholeness of life. We are not apart from it or separate from it. We are within the wholeness, sharing the organic, dynamic nature, sharing the inexhaustibility of creativity. Born in a society, we have responsibility of relating to human-made structures. She's now going into human-made structures. We have responsibility of relating to human-made structures, physically and intellectually. We have the responsibility to relate to the self-created, self-sustained life around us on the one hand, and the responsibility to relate to the human-made world and human-made beings around us on the other hand. In the human society, there seem to be two ways of functioning, two ways of relating. One is a functional relationship. You acquire knowledge and you accept the responsibility to utilize that knowledge and function as a teacher, a lawyer, or a doctor. She stops there under who her audience is. There are also people who do house cleaning or carpentry, paint pictures, or are on a hotline telephone, work with people in prison, whatever. This is a functional responsibility, and you have to operate in the human-made structures with others who are functioning the same way, acquiring knowledge, utilizing that knowledge efficiently, competently. Otherwise, the computers will take over. You are now coexisting with parallel brains, whether it is calculators, computers, or robots. So with precision, with competency, with accuracy you have to function. That is one responsibility. In this functional relationship, meaning at the workplace, in this society which we have built and which builds us, whatever responsibility you take over, you have to play the game as they play the game of cricket or tennis. There are rules and regulations. You cannot say, I have learned how to play cricket, so I will play as I like. Your likes and dislikes are irrelevant to the rules and regulations of the game. The efficiency depends upon your inner freedom from your likes and dislikes. It's an interesting way of expressing freedom, not freedom from rules and regulations, but freedoms from likes and dislikes. And I'm sure from having read her other material, she's quite a political woman. She does not mean never to change any rules and regulations which are seen to be false and harmful. The efficiency depends upon your inner freedom from your likes and dislikes. You may not like the persons who are members of your team, but when you are on the playing ground, your likes and dislikes have no relevance, no significance, no meaning. It will spoil the game. As you play the games and go by the rules and regulations, you move in the structures of society as an engineer or a lawyer and play the game by the rules and regulations. Now she comes to another point. Functional responsibility, meaning how we work together in keeping all of us going in all of our needs. Functional responsibility has to be discharged without a sense of identification, leading you to attachment and then obsession. We were talking about this in the group. It's quite a different thing whether one says, I write poems, or I paint pictures, or I am a writer, or I am a painter. Of course, if we are asked what we are, or we have to fill it into a form a questionnaire, then we write that. And we can also say it, but are we attached to this image? Then the image and maintaining it becomes more important than writing, or whatever we are doing. It overshadows the activity itself, and then needs to be maintained and repaired and so forth. Every identification creates a stiffness and rigidity. You build compartments within your wholeness and exclusively get attached to them. I'm a doctor, rather than I'm working with people who are sick. We're working together because the doctor also learns from the patients. We learn from each other all the time. That's the marvel of working together. Then you do not remain whole. Identification stimulates intolerance. Then you cannot tolerate differences of opinion. You cannot tolerate a different approach than yours. You become dogmatic. If your functional role requires you to be assertive, you have to learn to exercise assertion if necessary in relationships. It's an interesting way of putting it too. If your functional role requires you to be assertive, then you have to learn to exercise assertion if necessary in relationships without psychologically becoming assertive. A very fine difference, but very distinct. Needing to say something because the situation calls for it and saying it as clearly as possible, or needing to be listened to or needing to dominate others, feeling hurt if others don't listen to me, and so forth. We are talking here about an alternative way of living, an alternative dynamics of human relationships. This is what we're waiting for. The human race is on the threshold of a new culture enriched by natural and social sciences. As identification is a sickness that creates psychological complications, there is another sickness in the human psyche today, that of constant comparison with others. Earn the money. Why does not the matter end there? This unverbalized sense of jealousy, sense of comparison, is cooking up suffering for yourself. You cook it up in your memory. So while discharging the functional responsibility, it is very necessary for the health of the wholeness not to have a sense of comparison and jealousy. Please do see this. If you see and feel that truthfulness, decency, straightforwardness, non-stealing, non-cheating is the essence of humanness, why does not one feel fulfilled by living truthfully? If there is comparison and jealousy, you can never feel fulfilled. If the discharging of functional responsibility does not get complicated by psychological attitudes of identification or comparison or jealousy, life can become very simple. And here we're skipping, in all of these readings, things are skipped at times. The challenge is for revolutionizing the functional relationships and the way they are discharged. The need is for utilizing knowledge efficiently, with care and concern, with a sense of responsibility, without psychological involvement. Meaning, becoming somebody in the process who has to be nourished, repaired, and maintained. In one's imagery, not one's health. Now we come to the other realm of relationship, which we could call psychological. I am born as a child in some family, so one has to play the role of the father, the mother, the son, the daughter, the brother, the sister, and so forth. I am born in the midst of a network of relationships, and they have their own patterns sanctioned by society. Because maybe in India there is still more sanctioning of these relationships. Here they're falling apart. The child must behave this way, husband that way, wife this way, sanctioned by society, standardized by society, standardized by religions, traditions, conventions, and you are expected to live up to the standards, up to the expectation of family. How does one retain the aloneness while moving in this network of relationships? The functional relationship was for 8 hours a day. Here it is for 24 hours a day. Living under the same roof, sharing the same table, and so forth. In this field of relationship, is it possible that one unfolds one's being? That one unfolds one's being and does not use the movement of relationship acquisitively? Can relationship be a movement for manifesting what I am, unfolding what I am, rather than an opportunity to acquire something, to bargain and to buy something? You cannot buy acceptability. You want to buy a sense of belonging. Therefore, acquisition, attachment, expectation, suffering has been the way of human relationship through untold centuries. And she's speaking to a society where structures, family structures, are still, apparently, according to what she writes, quite intact. To relate has meant to own one's wife particularly, but also to own one's children. Maybe to own one's husband. As you possess a piece of cloth, do you want to possess another human being? Because he is your husband or she is your wife? Can there be an ownership between human beings? The challenge that is facing us today is whether the human race is willing to explore an alternative way of relationship. To find a way of relating where you are unfolding the content of your being and where you are grateful to the other person that they respond to your needs, your sexual needs, your sensual needs, and so forth. Not creating a pattern of behavior for them. To be grateful to each other for the opportunity to unfold whilst moving through relationship. To relate non-acquisitively, to be together, to share life, to share responsibilities without trying to own and possess one another. The other person cannot live for you. You have to live for yourself. And the act of relationship is the movement of life. As the being is fulfilled in the emergence of forms, do you feel fulfilled when you unfold yourself as a newly married wife, as an adult mother, as an old woman or man? Do you feel fulfilled by that unfoldment? If the unfoldment releases a sense of fulfillment, then you would not expect anything in return for that unfoldment. Aloneness is non-acquisitiveness. Aloneness is absence of expectations. Aloneness is the movement of unfoldment, manifesting, expressing unconditionally in a non-bargaining attitude. This book was copyrighted 1934. When did he write these letters? I don't know. They're translated, of course, the early 20th century, early 1900s. A young poet has written to Rilke, who was a famous poet, sending him materials and asking him for critical comments, and whether he was, I would just take this from having read this whole thing, whether he was suited to be a poet. Yeah, 1903, from Paris, this letter comes, my dear sir. I wish we had more time. Could read the whole thing, but it's also hard to listen to reading a lot, so I'll abbreviate it. You ask whether your verses are good. You ask me. You have asked others before. You send them to magazines. You compare them with other poems. And you're disturbed when certain editors reject your efforts. Now, since you have allowed me to advise you, I beg you to give up all that. You're looking outward, and that, above all, you should not do now. Nobody can counsel and help you. Nobody. There's only one single way. Go into yourself. Search for the reason that bids you to write, and for this we can substitute whatever urges people feel to do. It's always the same thing. Search for the reason that bids you to write. Find out whether it is spreading out its roots in the deepest places of your heart. Acknowledge to yourself whether you would have to die if it were denied you to write. This above all, ask yourself in the stillest hour of your night, must I write? Delve into yourself for a deep answer. And if this should be affirmative, if you may meet this earnest question with a strong and simple yes, then build your life according to this necessity. Your life, even into its most indifferent and slightest hours, must be a sign of this urge and a testimony to it. Then draw near to nature. Then try, like some first human being, to say what you see, and experience and love and lose. Do not write love poems. Avoid at first those forms that are too facile and commonplace. They are the most difficult, for it takes a great, fully matured power to give something of your own where good and even excellent traditions come to mind in quantity. Therefore, save yourself from these general themes and seek those which your own everyday life offers you. Describe your sorrows and desires, passing thoughts, and the belief in some sort of beauty. Describe all these with loving, quiet, humble sincerity. If your daily life seems poor, do not blame it. Tell yourself that you are not poet enough to call forth its riches. For to the Creator there is no poverty and no poor, indifferent place. I'm also skipping things here. And if out of this turning inward, out of this absorption into your own world, verses come, then it will not occur to you to ask anyone whether they are good verses. Nor will you try to interest magazines in your poems, for you will see in them a voice of your life. A work of art is good if it has sprung from necessity. In this nature of its origin lies the judgment of it. There is no other. Therefore, my dear sir, I know no advice for you save this: to go into yourself and test the depths in which your life takes rise, at its source, and you will find the answer to the question whether you must create. Perhaps after this descent into yourself and into your inner solitude, you will have to give up becoming a poet. But even then, this inward searching which I ask of you will not have been in vain. Your life will in any case find its own ways thence, and that they may be good, rich, and wide, I wish you more than I can say. What more shall I say to you? Everything seems to me to have its just emphasis. And after all, I do only want to advise you to keep growing quietly and seriously throughout your whole development. You cannot disturb it more rudely than by looking outward and expecting from outside replies to questions that only your inmost feeling in your most hushed hour can perhaps answer. This is from Krishnamurti's notebook, written in the 60s. This one in India. I don't know how many selections we will have time for. Maybe just one. There is a red flower among the dark green leaves, and from the veranda you only see that. There are the hills, the red sand of the riverbeds, the big high banyan tree, and the many tamarinds, but you only see that flower. It is so gay, so full of color. There is no other color. The patches of blue sky, the burning clouds of light, the violet hills, the rich green of the rice field, all these fade away, and only this wondrous color of that flower remains. It fills the whole sky and the valley. It will fade and fall away. It will cease, and the hills will endure. But this morning it was eternity, beyond all time and thought. It held all love and joy, There was no sentiment and romantic absurdities in it, nor was it a symbol of something else. It was itself, to die in the evening, but it contained all life. It was not something you reasoned out, nor was it a thing of unreason, some romantic fancy. It was as actual as those hills and those voices calling to each other. It was the complete meditation of life, and illusion exists only when the impact of fact ceases. Beauty is never personal. The hills were dark blue and carried the light of the evening. It had been raining, and now great spaces of blue appeared. The blue was ablaze with white clouds surrounding it. It was the blue that made the eyes sparkle with forgotten tears. It was the blue of infancy and innocence. And that blue became a pale Nile green of early leaves of spring, and beyond it was the fire red of a cloud that was gathering speed to cross the hills. And over the hills were the rain clouds, dark, heavy, and immovable. These clouds were piling up against the hills in the west, and the sun was caught between the hills and the clouds. The ground was soaked, red and clear, and every tree and bush had deep moisture. There were already new leaves. The mango had long, russet, tender leaves. The tamarind had bright yellow small leaves. The rain tree had a few shoots of fresh light green. After a long wait of many months of baking sun, the rains brought comfort to the earth. The valley was smiling. The poverty-ridden village was filthy, smelly, and so many children were playing, shouting and laughing. They didn't seem to care for anything except the games they were playing. Their parents seemed so weary, haggard, and forgotten. They would never know one day of rest, cleanliness, and comfort. Hunger, labor, and more hunger. They were sad, though they smiled readily enough, their eyes forlorn beyond recalling. Everywhere there was beauty, the grass, the hills, and the crowded sky. The birds were calling, and high in the air an eagle was circling. There were lean goats on the hills devouring everything that grew. They were insatiably hungry, and their little ones pranced from rock to rock. They were so soft to touch, their skin sparkling clean and healthy. The boy who was looking after them was singing away, sitting on a rock and occasionally calling to them. Ryokan was a Zen monk who lived in the hills in solitude. When? I don't know. Sometime. Doesn't matter. This section is called Summer. That's why I picked it. In the distance, frogs croaked in the mountain rice fields, the evening's single song. The rainy season is over. It's now clear. I go out. Green fields and cool breezes everywhere. Unable to sleep, I hear the voice of a young deer rising from a mountain ridge. The branches that will be used for this autumn's firewood are still blooming. Please gather some summer grasses wet with dew and come visit me. Not much to offer you, just a lotus flower floating in a small jar of water. I stretch out for a nap in my little hut. In the fields, frogs chant their songs, and the birds in the bamboo grove sing along. In the pond near my hut, the lotus flowers, covered with dew, bloom in a row. Working with their hands, the young girls chant a plaintive song as they plant rice in the mountain fields. The bamboo grove in front of my hut. Every day I see it 1,000 times. I never tire of it. Back and forth. All day the bent old man carries water for the parched rice seedlings. The willows are in full bloom. I want to pile up the blossoms like mountain snow. My hermitage lies in a forest. All around me everything is thick and green. Late at night, the faint sound of someone pounding rice. Dew drips from the bamboo onto the firewood pile, and the plants along the garden are also moist. Frogs croak in the distance, but then seem very close. Fireflies light low, then high, wide awake. Sleep is far off. Smoothing out the pillow, I let my thoughts drift. Once again, the children and I are fighting a battle using spring grass. Now advancing, now retreating, each time with more refinement. Twilight, everyone has returned home. The bright, round moon helps me endure the loneliness. Mary Oliver is a contemporary poetess. Spring. Somewhere a black bear has just risen from sleep and is staring down the mountain. All night in the brisk and shallow restlessness of early spring, I think of her. Her 4 black fists flicking the gravel, her tongue like a red fire touching the grass, the cold water. There is only one question: how to love this world. I I think of her rising like a black and leafy ledge to sharpen her claws against the silence of the trees. Whatever else my life is, with its poems and its music and its glass cities, it is also this dazzling darkness coming down the mountain, breathing and tasting. All day I think of her, her white teeth, her wordlessness, her perfect love. Singapore. In Singapore, in the airport, a darkness was ripped from my eyes. In the women's restroom, one compartment stood open. A woman knelt there washing something in the white bowl. Disgust argued in my stomach, and I left in my pocket, and I felt in my pocket for my ticket. I have to read this again. Disgust argued in my stomach, and I felt in my pocket for my ticket. A poem should always have birds in it. Kingfishers, say, with their bold eyes and gaudy wings. Rivers are pleasant, and of course, trees. A waterfall, if that's not possible, a fountain rising and falling. A person wants to stand in a happy place in a poem. When the woman turned, I could not answer her face. Her beauty and her embarrassment struggled together, and neither could win. She smiled, and I smiled. What kind of nonsense is this? Everybody needs a job. Yes, a person wants to stand in a happy place in a poem. But first we must watch her as she stares down at her labor, which is dull enough. She is washing the tops of the airport ashtrays, as big as hubcaps, with a blue rag. Her small hands turn the metal, scrubbing and rinsing. She does not work slowly nor quickly, but like a river. Her dark hair is like the wing of a bird. I don't doubt for a moment that she loves her life. And I want her to rise up from the crust and the slop and fly down to the river. This probably won't happen, but maybe it will. If the world were only pain and logic, who would want it? Of course it isn't. Neither do I mean anything miraculous, but only the light that can shine out of a life. I mean the way she unfolded and refolded the blue cloth, the way her smile was only for my sake. I mean the way this poem is filled with trees and birds. This is called the notebook. 6 a.m. The small pond turtle lifts its head into the air like a green toe. It looks around. What it sees is the whole world swirling back from darkness. A red sun rising over the water, over the pines, and the wind lifting, and the water striders heading out, and the white lilies opening their happy bodies. The turtle doesn't have a word for any of it. The silky water, or the enormous blue morning, or the curious affair of his own body. On the shore, I'm so busy scribbling and crossing out, I almost miss seeing him paddle away through the wet black forest. More and more the moments come to me. How much can the right word do? Now a few of the lilies are a faint flamingo inside their white hearts, and there's still time to let the last roses of the sunrise float down into my uplifted eyes. This one is called White Owl Flies Into and Out of the Field. Coming down out of the freezing sky with its depths of light, like an angel or a Buddha with wings, it was beautiful and accurate, striking the snow and whatever was there with a force that left the imprint of the tips of its wings, 5 feet apart, and the grabbing thrust of its feet, and the indentation of what had been running through the white valleys of the snow. And then it rose gracefully and flew back to the frozen marshes to lurk there like a little lighthouse in the blue shadows. So I thought, maybe death isn't darkness after all, but so much light wrapping itself around us, as soft as feathers, that we're instantly weary of looking and shut our eyes, not without amazement, and let ourselves be carried as through the translucence of mica to the river that is without the least dapple or shadow, that is nothing but light, scalding aortal light, in which we are washed and washed out of our bones. And the last one for today is called The Summer Day. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean, the one who has flung herself out of the grass, the one who is eating sugar out of my hand, who's moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down, who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last, and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? We will end here for today.